Hey everybody, this is Perch, and I'm here with Joe. How you doing, Joe?
I'm all right, Perch. How are you?
I'm doing great. We have the great privilege of being joined by Jay Gonzo. Uh, How are you doing tonight, sir?
Doing well, doing pretty darn good.
Now, I will get right into it. We want to talk about a lot of things with you, but the primary thing that we want to talk to you about is you have a campaign out, and we wanted to talk to you about that. Tell us about what you've got out right now.
Well, right now on Zoop, I don't know. Are you guys familiar with Zoop? Have you talked about it before?
We have, yeah, and I know
Okay,
a
cool.
lot of our viewers have gone to Zoop and done things there, but one of the newer platforms is still new, but people are familiar with it.
Yeah. It's comics only. It's built for comics by comics people. It's also curated, so you don't have to worry about stepping on anyone's toes. Like campaigns are kind of like put out at a steady pace. I don't have to worry about Keanu Reeves putting a campaign up the same time that I do. So and then
Yeah,
sucking all
nice.
the air out of the crowdfunding space. But yeah, so I am doing the second series of my the title. I've been doing a comic called Mano del Destino for the past like decade. In 2020, I did the trade paperback. Actually, 2021, the trade paperback came out. 2020, I ran a campaign for it, and it was a collected six issue. All six issues were in English. On one side, all six issues were in Spanish. On the other side,
Hmm.
complete story arc. It was a mini series, and then because it did so well, Image Comics put out a version of it in 2021. In May, that came out. There was the English only version of it. That did pretty well. Even though it was like represents a decade worth of work, everyone's like, okay, what's next? What's going on next with this? And I'm like, well, I guess series two. So I'm trying to stick to that Hellboy model where they're nice, kind of self-contained, mini series. Never going to get more than six at a time. Like this is going to be a 5 issue mini series with some kind of interstitial issues that don't really count toward the numbering. But yeah, kicking it off with an 80-page giant. Going to jump right in, kind of right where we left off after series one. It's not totally contingent that you need to have read series one to enjoy series two. Although if you do back the Zoop campaign, everybody gets a PDF of the first trade paperback, so
Oh,
you'll have the
nice.
ability to read all of it. And also, you can
Yeah.
still buy it. Like if you're that interested, you can go online. Right? I mean, it's an Image comic, so you can Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever you want online, you can find the first volume to buy right now. Or if you just want to back the campaign, you get the trade paperback.
Now, this first volume that you said it came out with Image, and Top
Yep.
Cow was involved as well.
Yes.
What's their relationship in all this?
They've just been great to me. Like I've known Matt Hawkins over there, president, for a really long time. Actually met him before I really got into comics. I mean, he was like, I was on deck to do some work over there. Me and this kind of team I had assembled on another project. They liked the project, but ultimately passed on the project because it overlapped with some of the ideas they had. But they were like, we really like this team. We'd like to bring you on board to, maybe do some stuff later. And I was on deck over there, and I got a job with Todd McFarlane in '04. And so then I had to like call Matt and be like, hey man, I can't be on deck because I work for Todd now. So, but we've just remained friends this whole time. And so at some point, actually 2017, maybe 18. I was looking for work. I was just, work had dried up, and I just reached out to everybody. I was like, hey man, you got anything for me? And Matt was like, hey, why don't you pitch me some ideas? I'm like, okay. So I started pitching ideas, and mostly with their characters. Like I thought I could just have fun with some stuff that they weren't doing anything with. And then he's like,
Hmm.
oh, we were kind of looking for more like original ideas. I'm like, oh, okay, well, let me dust those off. And in the interim, one of the guys who's worked over there for a while, a writer named Henry Barajas, he had a project that he was looking for an artist. And I've known Henry. I live in Phoenix, and he's like a Tucson guy. So we're like, we've known each other for, I don't know, like 5, 6 years at that point. And in some meeting, Henry was pitching the idea, and he's like talking about artists he could get. And Matt pitched back to him. He's like, oh, you should use Gonzo for that project. You know Gonzo? And like Henry's like, yeah, like we're friends. Like I have his number. I could call him right now. So like literally in that meeting, he just called me, and we did a book called La Voz de Mayo over there, which was a biography of a civil rights leader in Tucson, Arizona, in the '60s and '70s. And we did three issues of that, three like kind of oversized issues of that, and then like one big trade paperback. That went over really well. And they kind of were just like, yeah, like let's talk about other stuff you might want to do. And then once the trade paperback that I did had come out, the bilingual version had come out, I was like, hey man, why don't we do English only? And they were like, cool. It was produced, it was ready to go. It's like they had it was just like, yeah, it's something we'd love to have under our banner. And Matt's a good guy. I know at the time I knew Henry over there and Elena over there. Like I knew kind of almost everyone who worked over there. And so yeah, just put it out through them. That image process is a little smoother than having to like go through Image Central.
Hmm.
Like when you come in through one of the owners or one of the partners, like studios, then you're just in. Like there was no vetting process. It was like Top Cow says I'm good, so I get to have an Image book. And yeah, so that's how they got involved. And they've been cool. I mean, yeah, they've been great. I went and did a signing with them at in San Diego, a special edition, and yeah, like they're like no matter how things go with like Zoop or whatever else I might do for other companies, like I'm, if they need me to come sign, they want me to come do anything with them, I'm on board. Top Cow's been great to me.
That's really nice to hear. That's Top Cow has a really good reputation. A lot of people have said similar things that, and not to knock any of the other studios, just that Top Cow treats their people well, and a lot of people are very loyal in return.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're also upfront. Like you know your deal going into it. They don't change it. There's no like unmet expectations or anything. They're like, this is what it's going to be. This is how it goes. And yeah, I mean, I like that. I appreciate because I've had too many, not too many, but I've had a few kind of misunderstandings as to how things might work with a few other companies. And like they'll be, Matt Hawkins is a brutally honest guy. I mean, he's not like mean about it, but he's like he's not going to sugarcoat anything, and he's not gonna BS you either. Can we swear on this? Do you guys swear at all?
Sometimes.
Getting expectation up front, that's how it should be. But
okay. Yeah.
No, I mean, I remember one of the, like, I think the first, quote unquote publisher I was working with. This is going back over a decade, with like something I've been self-publishing. Like, yeah, they were kind of like comp copies. What are you talking about? Comp copies, like, and things like that. So
yeah,
they're not around anymore. So
yeah, it's amazing how well you can do when you treat people right. Like that's.
Yeah. Well, so to the book. I should mention at this point, I know a lot of people who follow the channel, and for whatever reason, I wanted to ask you about this. Seems to be this crossover between wrestling or luchador and comics. There's a lot of people that have interest in both camps. And I know a lot of people listen to this channel definitely have interest in that, dating all the way back. I mean, a lot of people, I think, who are into wrestling think about U.S. wrestling in the 90s, but there's fans of this channel I know who are big fans of New Japan and All Japan over there, and also huge fans of luchador style wrestling. So this book is very, I mean, that's the heart of it.
Yeah, I mean, the book is centered around a world in which like Lucha Libre is the most important thing in that world. Like, every business, political, whatever dispute happens, like any kind of civic dispute that happens within that world gets settled by luchador versus luchador. And I set that up in the first series, but ultimately it kind of becomes a story about a guy working his way through that world. In this next series, I'm really going to explore the world a little more. Like he's at a point where we can kind of like walk around the world now and see what happens there. But I mean, I think, I would say that it's the operatic, the kind of melodrama of it all. It's the, over the top theatrics of everything. And it's, it's soap operas that get settled in a ring. You know what I mean? It's like, it is soap operatic conflict that gets settled through fisticuffs. And I think that kind of resonates with people who enjoy comics, especially superhero comics. And they are superheroes, and it's performance art in a way that, especially Lucha Libre, that doesn't translate into kind of any other medium, except maybe like the occasional musician will kind of put on this like persona where you don't know like the real them ever. But I mean, like Lucha Libre it's Superman without the Clark Kent. These guys don't have alternate identities, and it doesn't matter who's under the mask. It just matters the mask. These guys have committed completely to the gimmick, and they live the gimmick, which I guess is the kind of wrestling shorthand for that. And I think that's something that it travels well. I mean, like Lucha Libre went over huge in Japan, and that Japanese strong style of wrestling is like a little even more committed than the kind of line of kayfabe that like Lucha Libre rides. Because up until fairly recently, Lucha Libre was not predetermined who would win at the end of the day. It was like there was a certain amount of one-upsmanship. So if you could put a move over on somebody, they had to sell it and like lose that match. But they're also like 3 of 5 falls or 2 of 3 falls. Like they typically go. It's a little different like wrestling structure than American wrestling. And I mean, I just it's all of the stuff you like about comics. It's just crazy costumes and over the top personality types, indirect conflict that gets settled through a certain amount of certain level of violence. Like what's not to enjoy about that?
I love this superhero connection, and it's absolutely true. And I think you mentioned Japan. I mean, you think about like Liger and people like that who obviously were influenced by the Lucha Libre style. But I mean, even kind of the classics, Misawa, Kobashi, they talk about El Santo and kind of the origins of Lucha Libre being so powerful to the sport, but also the strong influence of comic books. So this idea of the superhero has a mask and the secret identity is key, and kind of everything you just said there. Like, I again, for people who are coming in new to this, I think in the world of Lucha Libre, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, there are people who wear the masks everywhere. Yes. I mean, like, it is a secret identity to the public.
And it's performance art that extends beyond the ring. You know what I mean? Like, it's kayfabe. There's no suspension of disbelief. Yeah, those guys go to weddings that way. They go to public events. Like, El Santo and Mil Máscaras and Blue Demon starred in a bunch of movies where they still had their mask on. Like there is a legit spy movie that El Santo's in where I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's hard to go undercover when you're the guy in the silver mask, but it's still, it works. And it's when you go to see wrestling, you're inviting the audience to participate in performance art. Like, you need to buy into the reality that set the parameters of this world that we've created, the bifurcation of Rudo and Technico, the good guy versus bad guy, and the tenets of the sport itself, and they're also being asked to extend that beyond the ring. But also when we're like at movie premieres and we're at events and we're doing I'm just going to be this guy in the mask or this person in the mask, and you're going to accept that that's totally fine. And it is in Mexico. It's fine. Like, guys walking around in lucha libre masks and suits, like, kind of doing this, like, oh, that guy's a luchador. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. They don't, they probably don't believe that he's like an undead, biker or whatever. I mean, like, they might not believe like certain aspects of whatever, like, oh, he's not really actually Satan's son that's come to take my soul. But the guy is legitimately a luchador. He goes in the ring, he puts his body on the line every day, or 5 nights a week. And in that aspect of it, it can't be fake. You know what I mean? There's no CGI in the ring. Those guys have to pull that off, and I think there's a respect for the performance of it that doesn't beg the question, what's under the mask. You know what I mean? Like, it's a non-issue, and I think that's part of the fun of it is participating in that. Like booing the bad guy and cheering the good guy and trying to point to the ref when the bad guy's cheating and all. Like, yeah, it's such a cooperative, involved performance art that has to be like engaged with to be to be enjoyed. Like, you can't there's very little else that can kind of simulate that kind of experience, and it's part of what I try to do in the comic, is trying to like get the excitement of it all on the page, and there's it's fun, and it's dumb fun, and I think that's the real appeal of it.
Well, I love the comic. I mean, and there's a bunch of different directions to go in here, but I mean, you definitely give off the feel of a classic kind of lucha libre. And it's not just the characters; it's the atmosphere, it's the colors that's used, it's the technique of the style, it's actually the pacing of the panels. It has that feel to it, like you're watching a match and you're involved in it. You mentioned earlier, I think that's one of when comics is very, very powerful, it always feels like there's this cooperation between the creators and the readers, where they're both involved in the same way, like a wrestling match, where the people are in the ring, the people are in the crowd, they work off each other's energy. When that connection happens, it's magic, and that's how it feels reading your book.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I seek to do. Is I really like to elicit as much reader involvement as possible. That's why, like, my style is very kind of iconographic, basic American comics, like 1960s American comics. It is like part of the fun of that is taking this kind of like paragon of like white male power fantasy and subverting that into like a Chicano hero, kind of through color palette and also through storytelling. It gets a little subversive that way, which is kind of fun, but also it's an iconography. It's a shorthand that you kind of like can cut through a lot of like exposition. Like, I don't have to do a lot of like explaining what things are. You just kind of get that this is the hero because that's what a hero looks like, and this is the bad guy because that's what a bad guy looks like. And then playing in those shorthands allows for the story to just move and have fun. And I think that in that kind of Marcel Duchamp, like the viewer completes the painting. Like comics, like I know that Scott McCloud talks about it in Understanding Comics. Like they fill in the space between the panels, but also in that, in Understanding Comics, they talk a lot about like, masking and kind of minimalizing things, and then asking, when you represent iconography, people fill in what's not there, right? Like when you just have the idea of a hero, they put in the rest of it, and then it becomes more personal. And I think that comics is a medium that's like perfect for that, because you can, abbreviate the reality of the world. And so in that abbreviation, you're asking your audience to fill in a lot of what's not there, and what they fill it with is personal. It's their experience. And so when it becomes personal, it becomes memorable, and it also becomes a lot more dynamic than just being lectured. Like reading, like you want to read a textbook where someone's just like lecturing you on, spiral dynamics or something. Like, just dumb, fun comics that can work in a abbreviated reality, and a curated one at that too. Like the color palette is a confession of artifice. Like, this is a story, so don't get hung up on like real world nonsense or like how physics work or any of that. So like, when Kirby draws the Fantastic Car, it soars because it's just the idea of a flying car. But when, certain other like more naturalistic, realistic artists do that and draw every little rivet on there, it just looks like it's going to fall out of the sky because it looks too real. So, like, that's kind of where I want to be. I want to be in that kind of Kirby world of like the idea of things that can happen, and not a thing that will happen.
Yeah.
What was it? Going through the trade, the first volume that's available, the forward's written by Evan Dorkin. How'd that come about?
Evan's a friend of mine. I mean, I guess is the short answer. I met him, God, maybe even like close to 10 years ago, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, just at a Heroes Con. Sarah, his wife, came by, was looking at a t-shirt I had that from issue 1, there's that saying that I have in the frontispiece that says, like, it should be noted the luchador dons his mask not to conceal his identity, but to reveal it. I had like a shirt that said that on there. It was like in this like handwritten font, like this like really fancy kind of text. And she dug it, and she's like, "Oh, I'd love to get this for my husband." I didn't realize it was Sarah. And then she left, and I was like next to Tom Scioli, and he's like, "Oh, hey man, you were all okay." She was like, "Oh, I want to get this for my husband for Father's Day, but like you don't have the right size." I'm like, "Oh, sorry," And she leaves. And then Tom Scioli's like, "Oh, you were almost Evan Dorkin's Father's Day present." I'm like, "Oh, is that Sarah Dyer?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Shit." So I'm like, "Well, let me see if I like." So then I really like dug through everything and like found the size, and I did end up getting a size. Like I ran over to like their booth and I gave it to her, kind of surreptitiously, and then she's like, "Oh, thank you." And then he came by afterward to like thank me for it, and then checked the comic books out and dug them, and then we just became friends. Like I would just see him at shows, and then we became like, friendlier. We'd like grab a meal before shows or what have you, and then just over the past, I don't know, decade or so of going to shows, we just kind of got more and more friendly, and then when it came time to do, we did a wrestling panel together, like wrestling and comics panel together at Heroes in like 2015, 16, somewhere around there. And that's when I kind of like saw his real kind of his knowledge of wrestling and how deep that runs. And then just over the time and like kind of in dealing with him, I see that he's a guy. He's considered in his appreciation for most things, and even if it's dumb B horror movies from the 70s. Or wrestling, or some more high-minded stuff. Like he takes the same level of consideration. I think he has like a media studies degree or something, and then so he's really into like critique as an art form, and like kind of judging things on their own terms. And he's also been a guy who's championed my work and been really positive about it. So when it came time to put the book together, it was like just kind of floated the idea. It was like, "Hey man, is this something you'd want to maybe write a forward to?"
Nice.
And he said, "Absolutely." And then he gave me that great forward. Like that forward's amazing. Like it was kind of what I'd hoped, what I wouldn't have never really admitted to myself that's what I would have hoped for. But it like even exceeded what I would have, quietly hoped for in like my heart of hearts. Like, yeah, it's quintessentially Evan, but it's an appreciation of the art form, and it's an appreciation of the work that I had done. And it was a real gift to have. And that guy's great.
When you're talking about Evan there, I'm sure there's plenty of people listening to this that know who Evan is, and there's people that don't. If you had to recommend one of Evan's books for someone that's unfamiliar, what would you recommend?
Milk and Cheese, like Omnibus, the big. I'm a Milk and Cheese fan. I mean, I like the Bill and Ted stuff that he's done, and I've liked like Beasts of Burdens are fun. But to me, like Milk and Cheese is the most quintessentially Evan thing that I could possibly recommend.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. And it's one that I find a lot of current comic readers they're not familiar. It feels like it's not being kept alive like it should. And that's somebody we should actually talk to him at some point, Joe, soon.
Oh yeah, no, I love Evan. I've met him a bunch of times. He's hilarious.
Oh yeah, he's like one of those low key like behind the scenes like big deals in comics that no one talks about.
Yeah,
because he's great to everybody, and he's kind of important in a lot of ways, like to the indie scene of like a certain era, and kind of, the power couple that is him and Sarah, and like,
Mhm.
you know, um, when people talk about the Hernandez brothers, I think he's a guy who should be mentioned in the same breath. You know what I mean? Like he should definitely get pulled into those kind of
Mhm.
conversations. But there's just those guys who exist in comics that like, unless you're in comics, you don't know like, oh, like that guy's kind of like not like a big deal, but like has done a lot, like for the
Mhm.
industry, as a whole, because of kind of the rock stars of the industry like suck a lot of the oxygen out of the attention.
Yeah, that's
But
true.
he's a guy who should have 20 times the notoriety that he currently has. Like, I don't want to take anything away from anybody else, but there are people who have more notoriety who have done less for comics than that guy.
Well,
Oh,
particularly
sure.
for the indie scene, for sure. I mean, I think there was a period of time, especially in the '90s, where I think he drove so much attention and material. Anyway, there's
Yep.
Yeah.
'80s and '90s probably, but absolutely a key figure. But kind of back to you. So you have this campaign out.
Yes.
It's live now.
Yes.
It's for the next volume, and
Yeah.
it's pretty generous. I mean, I think this 80 pages, $20, kind of is your entry. Your entry price here. Actually, 15 if you want to go digital, but printed, 80 pages for $20. That's a pretty decent deal.
Yeah, I wanted to start off kind of like with a splash, like kind of like give people like that first big chunk to kind of immerse them in the world. And so like we see in the first series that there's like metafiction that lives around them. Like there's a cartoon of the comic characters within the comic pages, and we see kind of the disconnect between the like Disneyfication of like the reflection of events are kind of like a little softer than they are presented in the actual like real world story of it. And so like these guys are famous in that world, and so they do things like make movies and star on TV shows and that sort of thing. So with issue 1 of the second series, what I want to do is I want to delve into that metafiction and like represent it a little more broadly than I did in the first. Like we just kind of dive in, like we weave in and out of like the cartoon stuff pretty quickly in the comic, just because I needed to get somewhere. But in this series, I really want to take the time to like show the entirety of a movie that he's made in that world. And so, and part of the conflict in this series is going to be him contending with the fiction about him, like having to reconcile that with the person he actually is, and having this kind of like other people in charge of his image and what that's going to do to like who he is in the public mind, and him trying to like take some kind of agency of that. And so through the course of the series, he's going to be making this jungle adventure movie, and we're going to see him kind of like being on and off set, kind of contending with having to deal with Hollywood and making this jungle adventure movie. But like halfway through issue 1, we're just going to go to a movie premiere of another movie that he'd made earlier on, which is a spy adventure called Tangier Target, where it's like a James Bond kind of in like Flint sort of movie, very 60s kind of. And again, it's me kind of experimenting with like these well worn but kind of antiquated tropes about masculinity being portrayed in like kind of vintage movies. And so I'm going to take the kind of the debonair James Bond, and take my swipe at it, in a degree,
Mhm.
but also like, but they're also movies I love. Like everything that I appropriate in this comic is done out of love, and not like, oh, this needs to be taken down a notch or two, but like just like how this could have been cooler, So yeah, so we're gonna just basically like middle of the book, first 20 pages are gonna be kind of real world. Then he's like, oh, got to go to my movie premiere. We're gonna go to movie premiere, and then you're gonna get a 40-page comic book adaptation of a movie that he's made, Tangier Target. So like from opening scroll to closing credits, you'll get the entirety of the movie. And then we'll cut back into the real world and get like 20 more pages of real world. And then interstitially between the kind of numbered issues, so there's going to be 5 issues. That one will contain a movie, but interstitially I'm going to have some more comic book adaptations of movies that he made, possibly not just comic book adaptations. Like there's some other things I'm trying to like work. So it's going to be like
Cool.
issue 1's going to have a comic and a movie in it. Issue 2 will be a comic, like the real world, like the main narrative. Between 2 and 3, there's going to be another movie, which is going to be a sci-fi adventure, which is a giant robot versus giant monsters. Then real world, then another movie, which is going to be a surf movie, like a very kind of like Frankie and Annette kind of like
Nice.
not really rom-com, because I don't ever want Lamano to have like a romantic interest. So, but it's going to be kind of like surf, like a surf movie, like a more Big Wednesday than it is Frankie and Annette, but somewhere in between the two. Then real world, then the last movie that we'll see will be that jungle adventure he's been going through all the issues. We'll cap it off with like kind of like so those. Like I said, the format on those comic book adaptations is going to fluctuate a bit, but the issues will all be comic books and like but you'll get one of the metafictions within the first issue. Then it'll be like real world metafiction, real world metafiction, real world metafiction. I think that's how that works.
Nice.
I have a schedule. So I have a diagram somewhere of how they need to come out.
You've got your chart.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to make more work for myself, just as much as humanly possible. But it is the kind of thing where they're going to start like kind of become this like recursive loop of like once you see the kind of Tangier target and the themes of that, you see those kind of like prevalent in his life in the real fiction, and then like again like with the giant monster, you'll see kind of like some of the themes of the giant monster movie is going to kind of flow into his life, and it's not completely separate, detached from his life, but it allows me to have him in situations that I don't want to have to try to weave into the narrative of the world that's weird enough as it is, where like luchadors settle everything. But it's also like I just want to draw like Lamano with just trunks and a surfboard. Like I just want him like shirtless and just trunks with his mask on, holding a surfboard that has his his Hamsa icon on the surfboard. Just again pushing that world out, exploring metafiction. He also like there's a newspaper strip of him that I do on Instagram. That's the Lamano newspaper strip, and it's the newspaper strip that appears in the newspaper that he reads in that world. So it's not a recap, it's not an extension of the world, like the quote unquote real world. It's another metafictional like you made up illustrated comic strip that happens. And I put those. I've been putting a couple of those up, but I broke my arm, and so I wasn't able to kind of keep up on it. But I'm going back to those now that my arm's almost completely rehab. Nice. Yeah, and again, it's the kind of thing where in that he's like, he's. I think the first one is like he's going after a jewel thief, and then there's going to be like some other just random things that he doesn't do. But it's within the comic book, it'll get mentioned where people are like, oh, or did you catch that jewel thief? He's like, that's the comic strip. That's not like me. Like that's not who I am.
That's
but it's
nice
like
immersive world. Yeah.
Yeah, so I can. Go ahead.
So I wanted to. So I was going to ask you more about. So you're basically taking kind of these. You have the world of Lucha Libre. You have these movies and this period of time that you're doing some really cool stuff with. But hang on a second, you broke your arm.
Oh yeah. I in May of 2021, at the very end of May 29th actually, I fell skateboarding. And snapped my humerus, my right humerus. They are my draw with. So, emergency surgery, 2 plates, 17 screws.
Oh my God.
And I'm back together. It's been a long, hard road of rehab. It kind of slowed down a little bit of the Kickstarter fulfillment from before. That's been a whole other, I'm still fulfilling the Kickstarter campaign I did in the end of 2019, but a lot of that has been stuff way out of my control, like supply chain issues and stuff. But I'm rounding I'm 68%. No, am I in the 70s now? Yeah, so I'm really close to like done. But
I wanted to follow up with again, sorry about your arm and everything.
Oh, thanks, man.
But no problem. But speaking of art, who are some of your influences, and like how did you like what made you want to get into art? Who are early influences, and who are also like influences like later on? Because I feel like a lot of people have their like, oh, I was really into this, and then like as I got into it, I got more into this and all that kind of stuff.
I mean, I think the biggest influence on me is probably Spider-Man.
Sure.
And the newspaper strips that used to come out. Like my it was the LA Times carried the newspaper or the Spider-Man strip, but the Orange County Register didn't. And my family lived just inside of Orange County, like my parents, but all of my extent, like my aunts, uncles, and grandparents all lived in LA County. And so my grandfather would cut out them because he knew I liked Spider-Man and he knew I liked that comic strip. And I just loved the way that particular Marvel house style from the 60s like looked in opposition to all the other comic strips that were happening. And then I had like the Power Records, the Spider-Man Power Records that have like John Romita Sr. cover and then Dick Giordano to the interiors. So like that Romita version of Spider-Man kind of was like one of the most influential things in my life, and then growing up I loved I just loved all the Alex Toth cartoons, like all of the Mighty Mightor and the Herculoids and Space Ghost. And then even like the Johnny Quest, like I love the look of those cartoons. Like I just love old comic, like 60s kind of house style looking stuff. And then, God, I'm trying to think of like I really got into, I started reading comics in like 82, 83, so like, pretty soon like Simonson's on Thor, and, Zek is doing like Spider-Man covers and specials, and, Art Adams did that long shot series and the X-Men annuals. And so like, those are guys that like, I really kind of like, I loved, Art Adams. I loved, Mike Zek. I loved, what's his name? Who did the Golden, Michael Golden. Those are guys like that really kind of influenced me. And I always loved like 60s house style stuff, like from Marvel. Like I love Bronze Age. I love kind of like 60s stuff. And then I'm like, I ended up going to, I went to like the High School of the Arts for like visual art. So then I just got into like, guys like Toulouse-Lautrec, this guy, like I really like, I like the graphic nature of like, Lautrec and like a lot of, like Egon Schiele and dudes like that, kind of like, I think like Schiele and that kind of school of art that came out of that in the 90s, like the early 90s, that kind of like, real rough hewn, kind of, lanky figures and stuff. Like I really kind of gravitated that for a while. And then I remember jumping back into comics and, digging stuff like Chris Bachalo and Joe Mad and Humberto Ramos and guys like that. And what is his name? God, the guy who did X Factor for a while, and then he did an Angel one. Adam Polina. Like I really like Adam Polina. Polina and Jason Pearson. Like when I saw Body Bags, like that really kind of like blew my mind. Like the kind of third generation of Image guys. And then I kind of wanted to do like that, like somewhere between like Polina, Pearson, and like Chris Bachalo is like what I spent a good chunk of my life trying to draw like that. And then I don't know, like I was at a really bad con, really tiny con, but this guy had a great quarter bin, and I just grabbed a bunch of like 60s stuff, and I just started like re-looking at like all these, these dudes who, like especially, like Kirby and kind of all of his acolytes, and just like, oh, this is like, just kind of keeping it simple really has a lot of like weight to it, like a lot of merit to it. And I went to graphic design school, and I ended up like working in advertising for 30 years, and so like iconography always kind of had like a place in my heart. And I also tattooed for a long time, and I still tattoo. And there's like a reductive kind of like iconography approach like to tattooing, because you got to like kind of keep it simple to make sure the tattoos last. And there was a time I got caught up in a very kind of like Guy Aitchison over rendered kind of like color bomb like 90s new school tattooing for a minute, but then traditional tattooing started kind of coming back, and like I realized like the strength of the iconography of it. Right about the same time I dug back into old comics and realized the strength of the iconography of that. And then like for Father's Day in, God, I don't know, 2006 or 7, like my dad's a Green Lantern fan, so I wanted to draw like a Green Lantern for him, because like everyone's always bugging you for artwork when you're an artist. So it's like, I should just give them a piece so they can have some artwork of mine. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna do this Green Lantern, but I'm gonna do it like 60s style, like old kind of Marvel house style, like Jack Kirby. And then I in doing that, I really just kind of fell in love with drawing that way, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna stick to this kind of like 60s house style, like 60s Marvel house style. I started looking at guys like like Dick Giordano and like Lou Fine, even like guys like kind of older than that, and like Milton Caniff and Alex Raymond and dudes like that. I just kind of like that kind of classic American illustration style, that kind of like Loomis school of illustration, but like by way of guys like Milton Caniff, who like kind of internalized it, and like, because Caniff is kind of the halfway point between like Loomis and Kirby, and then just obviously Jack Kirby. I mean, like I just, everything Jack does is kind of genius. And do I really need to explain the genius of Jack Kirby?
Oh yeah,
like, yeah, it was great. When I worked at McFarlane, I was like really getting into that stuff, and my wife at the time had bought me this like Jack Kirby Marvel collecting edition of like some Marvel work, and I just had it on me one day. I was like leaving, and Todd was like, "Hey, what do you got there?" I'm like, "Oh, it's just Kirby book my wife got me." He's like, "Oh, it's the fucking best." And then he just sat there and like literally almost page by page went through that book and just told me like kind of all the lessons he learned from Kirby, like all the stuff
awesome.
that he, like, all the stuff he apes when he draws his stuff, that he got from Kirby, which is just great. I mean, it was like literally, I think we were in that parking lot for about an hour and a half, about 90 minutes. just talking about Jack Kirby. Like, so yeah, I just got like an art lesson from Todd McFarlane about Jack Kirby. Yeah. I mean, that whole job was worth it right there, you know. But,
there's people who would pay an insane amount of money for that. It's no, that I can't think of actually a more interesting hour to spend than and
you know, Todd's a guy who just does Jack. I mean, like, that's something people like don't really see a lot of, but it's like the basics and the structure and the storytelling of it is all Kirby. It's just he does a lot more noodling than Kirby did. Yeah, we got to talking about. I'm like, you know, I was gonna ink that piece for my father, and I would talk to Todd. I'm like, hey, I go, if you were gonna ink like an old traditional, like a Kirby guy, because Todd's a nib guy, and those guys like, you know, Royer and those guys, they're all brush guys. I'm like, well, would you use a nib or would you use a brush? Like, would you know, how would you approach that? He's like, oh no, I did. I did some Jack. I inked some Jack stuff. I'm like, oh cool. So yeah, I used my like my hunt, you know, nib and, you know, yada yada. He's like, yeah, I'd have to double up lines and what have you. He's like, but yeah, I just use a nib. I'm like, cool. And then the next day he just walks into my office and throws down like the what was it, Phantom Force and whatever the 2 pages he had done of Kirby's. Like, he just throws them down. He's like, go check those out. I'm like, God, I don't even want to touch these, Todd. What are you doing?
Wow.
Drop them on my desk. Yeah. So I got to check those out and cool. Yeah, he had. I guess he did 2 covers. One, he just inked over the pencils and then erased the pencils. And like as he's erasing it, realizes like, oh, I probably should have lightboxed this and not be erasing Jack's pencils. And then the next thing he did, he light block or blue line and then like inked that. So yeah, and then he sent Jack the pencils back, and then Jack sent him back the pencils and the inks and was like here kid, you know, have these. So yeah, Todd had the original pencils and the ink piece, and then he had the inked piece of those or like late era Kirby comics, which Jack made more money on those books, those like dumb Phantom Force books, than like Satan 6, was that the other one, something like that? Yeah, I can't remember the name of both of those. And then yeah, Jack made more money on those because those were Image books or Pacific books that went out, and like he had participation, you know, points on those than he ever did on anything he did for Marvel. So. Yeah. But
that's cool, and that see, you brought it down there at the end. Actually, that's kind of sorry, man. Yeah. You mentioned both being a tattoo artist and also being in advertising. Yes. We've talked to other artists who are in advertising. What's interesting is I find, and I don't have enough of I guess enough evidence to kind of prove the theory, but it feels like people who have done work in advertising seem to communicate a little bit clearer on the page, is my theory. And you see it with your stuff. You put, not just in the comic itself, but in the back matter as well, there seems to be a real desire to connect to the person reading. And I see that with people who've been in advertising.
Yeah, definitely. That's because that's an advertising thing. Like advertising is design. Like, it's not art. It's and there's a metric for success. Like you have to move the needle. Like, my job as an advertiser, what I'm selling is efficacy. Like that's kind of like I'm going to probably get into some well-worn, you know, territory. This is a lecture I give a lot to like students and stuff. At the end of the day, an advertiser's job is just, what are we really selling? Mm-hmm. You know, like what is the thing that we're really selling? And it's never quite what the client thinks they're selling. You know, and the example I always give is that, you know, Nike doesn't sell athletic equipment. Nike sells transcendence of self through sport. They're selling you the opportunity to be the best you possible. How you get there is their athletic equipment. And so if we're selling the opportunity to be the best you, if we're selling transcendence of self through sport, how are we supporting that message as opposed to just telling people about the features and benefits of the product that we're putting in front of them? And that anything we do can be supported by that brand promise, the promise of a better you. And so if you can answer that question, then the marketing aspect of it becomes a little easier. But, you know, who are you selling it to? What are you really selling? Those are the key questions. And it's never about what you're telling them, and it's never about what you're showing them. It's about how they feel about what you have shown and told them. And that is what I learned to take into comic books, was like, nobody cares about what I write and nobody cares about what I draw. They care about how they feel about what I've written and drawn. And so how do I elicit an emotion from them about what is the emotional truth of each moment, of each spread, and of each comic, right? And how they relate to each other, and conveying those through visuals, through set and setting, through staging, through blocking, color palette choices, like quality of line work. All of these things work in concert to elicit what I want from a client, or from a reader, right? Like what, if this, and there should be some, dynamism to it. There should be some movement to it. From every 2-page spread should go somewhere, right? Like, so upper left should be calm and lower right should be aggressive, or there should be some journey that happens. And I think at some point, some people wanted to tell people a bunch of stuff, and so they tell them a bunch of different things. And I just think that comics, when they're at their best, allow you to feel a bunch of different things. Like a lot of so like I always try to, like young writers, I'm like, before you write dialogue, or before you start setting the stage and like all of this like Alan Moore nonsense that everybody wants to do. And Alan Moore's a great writer who made a lot of good writers terrible.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, it's not easy. I think people believe it's very easy to copy the style of someone else, and
they're emulating the style of success, not the substance of it. Like it doesn't always dovetail in it. Like you don't need to do that for everything. So, but I'm like, when I talk to young writers, especially people who aren't going to draw, I was like, what do you want the reader to feel in this moment? What do you want them like? What is happening? Not what's being said. Not what's not the dialogue that's happening. What is like literally happening? Because if what's happening is someone is talking, that's a boring panel and shouldn't be in there. Like the panel, like what's happening should never be like, oh, person A is talking to person B. Give him some business to do. Like, all right, he's making a cup of coffee while he's talking to person B. Now, what's happening is he's having a conversation while he's trying to like make coffee, and maybe the coffee becomes synonymous or allegorical of some other dynamic that's going on there, or emblematic of some other dynamic that's going on there. Maybe the guy puts like way too much sugar in it. Like we watch him keep pouring and pouring and pouring, and the guy he's talking to is like stops looking at him and starts just looking down at the amount of sugar, going like, what is that weird power dynamic about? And then he just drinks it without even flinching in front of him. Like that's a power move. Like, yeah, give him some business to do, man. Have him lighting his cigarette the whole time. Have him like putting a book away. Like what is happening as opposed to like what's being said. And I think that a lot of people have moved into like what's being said. Look how Joss Whedon clever my dialogue can be, as opposed to like just it's a comic, man. Stuff should happen. Sorry, end of tirade.
No, it's good to talk about, because I think especially when you're talking about there's like the Whedon style dialogue, and other people do it too. I would argue that Peter David was doing it before and better, but
absolutely, I will agree to that. Yeah, but I think Whedon's a little more universally the model of style. I mean, he's a guy who took all the wrong lessons from Tarantino.
Yeah, because the problem is you end up writing yourself into a corner, because everyone ends up either being way too smart for the situation they're in, and then a few pages later, or a few scenes later, depending on the medium, are way dumber because they have to be too stupid to solve the thing or get out of the situation they're in.
Yeah.
And you end up getting a very weird, jarring situation. I think with someone like Joss, there were times where he pulled it off better than others. But
it's like anything else. You can bring something novel to the table, and it's very stylistic, it's very flashy. But if there is no substance behind it, people can be enamored by that thing they haven't seen before. But 3 years, 5 years, 10 years later, it's like, all right, there's they cotton on to the fact there's no substance here.
Yeah,
and then 10 years later, you can still have people being like, I understood that reference. And,
absolutely. There you go. That's the problem. We just fixed comics, guys. We did it right here and now.
But do you think that you wind up? I mean, so you have a bunch of things going for you. It feels like, because you're both a writer and the artist.
Yep.
So you have to you're telling the story, but you have to visually communicate it. So that burden is on you. You're not passing it off to someone else. You have the advertising background that teaches you that you do have to connect with your audience. If you don't connect with your audience, then you're creating noise. So it feels like you lined up a bunch of different things, in addition to kind of the great people you got a chance to work with, that put you in a pretty nice spot. And then thus your book reads that way. It reads like something that wants to connect.
it's also something I love. Like, I love 60s comic books. I love Lucha Libre. I love my Chicano culture. Like, it's a love letter to all those things. And I think that kind of at the end of the day, that's what sells more books than my draftsmanship, my palette color choice. Like, with just people smell of the love coming off of things. I mean, we're at a point now where our interaction with everything is can be so vast that we need to, like, there's a great book I read, a dozen years ago, Daniel Pink book called A Whole New Mind. And it talks about, like, the internet connectivity and the abundance has now created an emotional connection to the most banal of things, essentially. Like, nowadays, in the 1800s, I just needed to know where plungers were because I needed a plunger, right? And then at some point, like, by the 50s, and now it's like, well, I want either the cheapest or the longest lasting, and I can make now we get into the history of advertising. We get to a point of, like, feature benefit statements, like superlatives, longest lasting, strongest, biggest, cheapest, whatever. And now we can kind of affix attributes to these things beyond their functionality. Now we're at the point where how I interact with companies is the same thing that, like, my mom tells me she loves me on, right? So now when I go to buy a plunger, I get to think about what kind of plunger speaks to me as a person. You know what I mean? It's like both in design and the carbon footprint it leaves and the ecology. Like, there's so many factors involved in, like, a plunger decision that you have to be authentic in what you're representing, because there are people authentic in what they're representing. And so a crass money grab can get smelled a mile away. Yeah. But authenticity is the new currency, and that's something as an advertiser that I try to caution clients against, especially when we're doing branding, like logos and that sort of thing. It's like, we don't want to make your company the cool, hip, like hipster coffee shop version of this when you guys are a bunch of accountants. Because I can create that image and I'll make you look like the coolest, like, like you guys have fixed gear bicycles hanging on every wall in your office, but they're going to get there and they're going to see that you've got the leather cell phone case clipped to your belt, like, like, so let's not promise something we can't deliver, right? And I think that you can see when someone's jumping on a bandwagon, they don't really mean it, and then you can see when someone loves something. And that's, again, talking to, like, younger artists or writers and stuff. Like, my advice to young artists and artists of any kind is just draw like you mean it. Yeah, like that's as simple as it gets. Like, just do it like your heart's into it, and the rest will happen. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, then you'll have something you love when it's done. You might not be able to sell them, but you probably will, because, like, that kind of, like, love, that kind of authenticity sells itself. But kind of, crass commercialism, like, oh, this thing is hot right now, everybody's doing gender swap versions of this thing, so I'm going to do whatever. Like, whatever the trend chasing that you're doing is a race to the bottom. But if you do something you love, you'll never be disappointed in what you've created, and then it'll probably sell better.
So you're not going to watch that new Zorro, is where this is going.
Oh, is there a new Zorro?
They're doing a gender swap Zorro on, like, what, the CW or something like that.
Well, it says CW, so no, probably not.
Good call.
The press release reads like a checklist of all the things that to ensure your failure. You could
exactly. Like look how woke this all is. I mean, it could be great. Like, I'm not going to say, but I have on occasion been in a place where CW shows have been on, and I've only been able to hear them and not see how pretty everybody is on the screen. And I encourage anyone who says they like any CW show, just give that a shot for a minute. Just listen, don't watch, and then form an opinion about whether or not you like said show. So, I mean, I guess it depends on how pretty the people are on the show, because I might get sucked in.
I got through a little over a season of Arrow, but they kept going back to the flashbacks on that stupid island. And I was like, I couldn't.
Yeah, man. Like, I was telling someone this the other day. It's weird that we live in a world where people who enjoy football can give you, like, pass ratings off the top of their head because of fantasy football, because of D&D for jocks. And Kumail Nanjiani got a 6-pack to play a Marvel Eternal. It's like the nerds got way jockier and the jocks got way nerdier in my lifetime. And I don't know what to do with any of it.
It is the monkey's paw. I mean, can you imagine back in, like, the late 80s, early 90s, and thinking, like, hey, one day There will be the Flash will have a show, and Green Arrow will have a show, and a bunch of like Rip Hunter will have a show. Like they're all beyond, but it will be the CW, and it's going to.
Oh yeah. I guess. I think
Yeah.
what was it? My wife watched one of those shows. I'm not gonna and. What's his name? Elongated Man showed up, but he just shows up as like whatever, like Detective Dibney. I'm I wasn't watching it. I like perked my head up. I'm like, is the Elongated Man in this? Like, are you kidding me? Like, is that how deep into the well? And every time I see one of those deep cuts, like there's the fact that people have opinions on like Thanos right now is kind of ridiculous in my world. Like to
it is.
Little 5-year-old me watching Nicholas Hammond climb the side of a building on the Spider-Man show in 1978, could have never dreamed of a multiversal Spider-Man movie with 3 different Spider-Mans in it, and a Green Goblin and a Doc Ock and and a Venom and all these. Yeah, it's just I was just happy to have those.
It's also strange. Yeah. Same thing, by the way, if you were into like Rumiko Takahashi back 25, 30 years ago, and you're like, wow, this manga thing, I hope one day people like it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, that's crazy. But when Ralph Digby showed up, did someone step on Sue's brain till she died, or is that just the comics?
I don't know. I don't know what exactly happened. I just know that he introduced himself as Detective Digby. I think I was literally walking out of the room, and I did the like very cartoonish thing of like stopping in my tracks and backing in, and like is the Elongated Man like. I guess Buena Vista's shown up in one of those shows too.
Oh,
in a live action. Yeah, and Buena Vista is a guy I've got a really weird obsession with. Like one of these days, I'm gonna make my dumb Buena Vista comic. Like I pitched it. Like I had some okay connections at DC, and I pitched it, and they kind of dug it, but they're like, I don't know that we can sell this. And then those people no longer work there, so like kind of my in at DC has gone away. But it's the thing that like if anyone ever asked me anything I want to do at DC, it's a Buena Vista story. I've got it all written, ready to go. It can like reclaim the character in a way that's a little unexpected. But the fact that Buwannabe showed up on TV before I got to do my comic really blew my mind.
All those people that aren't there anymore were probably so successful greenlighting so many amazing projects that they're probably all in Hollywood now. So they probably made the right call.
Yeah, they definitely. Well, yeah, that's another thing. I don't know what they're up to. I mean,
no.
I've got to pitch a couple things.
I get it. Like
I've got to pitch a couple things to Marvel and DC, and it's like again, everyone seems to dig the idea. Like, oh, this is really cool. We can't really sell this. We did have. I was working with another writer, and we had a thing at DC that looked like it could have gone through, and it was being championed, and then like within, I want to say less than a week, I read an article about that guy leaving the company and going to some video game company, and he was like oh, so what does this mean for us? And then we checked kind of back in with like the secondary people we've been talking to, and it's like, yeah, everything that guy touched is dead now. I'm like, oh, well, thank you for knowing you were going to leave, and then walking our thing into the offices, knowing that the second you left, it would also die. So like that's kind of it's even worse that they liked it and wanted to do it until that guy jumped ship. Now they don't want to touch it at all.
No,
that's awesome.
That is unfortunate. I hate knowing that there's a non-0% chance that we might all live to see a gritty retelling of Jeff the Land Shark.
Oh, yeah. Look, man, when the D-Man movie comes out, I'm going to be first in line, dude. I'm going to be there.
D-Man and Land Shark. Let's do it.
Yeah. I'm
pretty sure Warren has probably done D-Man by now.
Yeah, probably.
Oh, here's the thing I was talking about the other day. We were like, at what point are we going to get Amalgam Universe movies? How far away from Dark Claw do you think we are?
Well, Disney will probably
to take Disney buying Warner Media. That's what.
Yeah, one has to buy the other, right? Sooner, like Highlanders, there can be only one.
Yeah. Well, Disney will probably buy it within the next 5 years, and it's going to be awful. And
I can't wait for my Spider-Boy movie and or Dark Claw, the animated series. So
let's get Dark Claw.
Yeah, it's exciting. They'll buy it within the next 5 years. Within 10 years, they'll outlaw original IP from people that aren't part of Disney. It's gonna be great.
The Disney Thought Police. I'm really looking forward to when that happens.
That sounds double plus ungood.
Maybe. Jesus. Thank you for
thanks for that poll. That was great. And I'm going to have that Annie Lennox song stuck in my head for the rest of the day.
That's why we have you here, Joe. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
If he makes a Butlerian Revolution reference, I'm going to have to get at it.
It's coming.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
In all seriousness, you mentioned a minute ago authenticity with the book. So here's, I'll wander into this carefully because I want to say this. I'm not meaning to throw darts at anyone else by saying this, but right now, the big publishers are really trying to put out these books, kind of saying we're speaking with an authentic voice to different cultures. And they put these books out, these kind of anthologies, and they always feel very clunky to me. Like it's the last thing from authentic. And yet you open up this book and it feels nowhere in the book do you have like a forward telling the reader, this is you mentioned a Chicano experience. This is, you don't need to mention it. It's just inherent in every panel and every drawing in the story. You just read it and it's really enjoyable. Like from the cover to the text. You in the Zoop campaign, you've got posters there that look like posters from the era. I mean, it's right there in the visual. And so I guess so you nailed the authenticity here. Was it hard? I mean, you're making it sound very effortless, and yet it feels like people struggle.
It was. I mean, it was. I like to say I'm brown on purpose. Like I definitely like it's Chicano. It is a Chicano-ass story written by a Chicano for Chicanos, and the fact that other people enjoy it is kind of is cool. But like I just wanted to celebrate my culture more than anything because far too often Americans have become enamored with Mexican poverty and violence, and they're well on their way to crafting this mono narrative that doesn't exist outside of the cartels and their influence on small parts of the country. And so much so that every time you see Mexico, it's sepia tone and brown looking. And I just know the bright vibrance of my culture to be quite contrary to that. And so, I think, I don't know if you read the back matter, but it's like, rather than curse the darkness, I decided to light a candle. I say this often that being a minority in America, you have to fight your fight, but you also have to express your beauty. Like that's fighting your fight will afford you rights, but expressing your beauty affords you dignity. And that's ultimately what I wanted to do, was kind of just show this is the thing that needs to be represented, and not in the weirdly fetishized, brutal violence of the cartels and its effects, and in the way that exoticizing people is dangerous representation. I wanted to move away from that. And it was deliberate only in that, I'm just going to love this comic. I'm going to, put all the things I love about a lot of different things on here. And that was the only really deliberate part of it. And then the rest just kind of flowed out of me. And I just think that when you come from a place of love and not virtue signaling, that you end up with a better product. And I think that sometimes when you work for a bigger corporation, that agenda can supersede the love part of it, and now you're posturing in a way, with people, and it's a little exploitative to say the least. To say we're going to get this type of marginalized person to create a book, and look, we're giving them free reign, and they get real showy about kind of but at the end of the about what kind of autonomy they've given them. At the end of the day, they still have corporate overlords and a bottom line to hit. Or they're trying to get a PR hit, and truth be told, I am a guy who gets pulled into brownwash things on occasion. We like the fact that we get to hire a Chicano artist to come do X, Y, or Z, and I'm a little reluctant in motivations. When you walk into a place and you see that you're a diversity hire, I tend to just bounce out of there. But if their intentions are good, I hear everybody out. But it's if I just get the sense that I'm basically there, I'm the punk rock boyfriend that's there to piss off dad, which I've been before in my life. So I have pretty long history of being walked into a room to elicit a reaction from people who would have a problem with me. And at my age, I'm just a little tired of it. But if there's opportunity to do something engaging, then I'll do it. If things are, I've had plenty of wrongheaded things come my direction too, where people are like, I'm just not the guy for that. And I'll just kind of tell them, like, honestly, I think it's a little wrongheaded. I don't think I'm the guy for it. And I kind of walk away from it. But there is a little bit of misguided championing of marginalized people that happens. And I mostly just didn't consider any of that. Like, I had seen quote unquote inclusion gone wrong time and time again. And I just was like, well, I'm just going to do this as right as I can. And not, and I did things like, there's some Spanish in the book and I don't translate it, and there is, and the book itself is like La Mano del Destino. I could have called it like El Revenjo or something like that, a little more accessible. But I'm like, look, if you can't get past 4 Spanish words to come check my book out, this book is for sure not you. If you're the kind of person who's going to be bummed out by 4 Spanish words, 4 pretty basic, like everyone kind of knows Manos because we all see wash your hands signs in bathrooms. Destino is just destiny with an O at the end of it. And then, it's really not that big a deal. But if you can't get past it, then I'm for sure not for you. So just kind of keep walking. And I'm okay with like letting that go.
Sure. But then your cover it communicates Lucha Libre style in the colors and the art. And we haven't talked nearly enough about the colors. I mean, and you have the color palette in the back matter of your book that you're using, and just everything lines up. And I was having a conversation with an editor 2 days ago, I guess, and I know we were going to do our interview, so I had reread your material and was getting ready for it. And I'm having this conversation with the editor, and the editor is saying that they're kind of bemoaning the fact that these efforts to expand into other groups are not connecting. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, I read your book and it's like, well, this clearly connects. And now granted, I grew up with a lot of Hispanic people around me in my neighborhood. A lot of my customers in my first shop were Hispanic. Luminaris was a big deal at the end of every year. And, but still, I read this and it's fun. It's enjoyable. Again, maybe that's because I appreciate Lucha Libre and a lot of these kinds of things. So it's fitting me, but still very accessible. And I see these people struggling, like you say, to get their books across. But it's not that hard. And maybe it's just a matter of, find some people, give them passion, truly unlock their ability to tell the story they want to tell. Because I do think that's it.
That's the problem right there. Is they're being managed by people who manage Anglo stories most of the time.
Yeah.
They're not in a position and they're not comfortable enough to just let people do, like, maybe make some mistakes, but also just do what they're going to do. And that's kind of the burden of kind of mass media in general, is that like nobody knows what's going to be successful. They just know what was successful. And so they try to just duplicate that. And then they're almost accidentally surprised by things like Halloween or other movies that like, have like low budgets and just like hit a nerve, like, oh, wow. Well, how much oversight did, Carpenter had when he made Halloween? Like zero, right? Like, that's, you guys took, Will Smith and Ang Lee and gave us Gemini Man. You know what I mean? Like you took like what should have just been printing money and gave us Gemini Man. And it's just like, I was just talking about someone this other day, like the word cult classic and sleeper hit exist to cover up the fact that they don't know what the hell they're doing, because these are things that had an audience that could have been widely successful had it just been marketed right in the first place, but didn't find its audience because you guys, you gatekeepers, you managers, you people who pull the strings, didn't know what the hell you were doing. And so you tried to, market Fight Club like it was an action movie when it was, you know what I mean? And so these action heads went and saw it and they didn't get nearly the amount of explosions they wanted out of it. And wow, this is a contemplative piece about toxic masculinity. Holy, like I can't recommend that in the movie, and then it hits video and on demand. What happened? People who would have appreciated it find it and go like, oh wow, this is a really good movie. So if they knew what they were doing with my culture, they'd have done it already. And there are little inroads into it. Like, I don't know if you guys have seen Maya and the Three by Jorge Gutierrez, the guy who did El Tigre. Brilliant. So Latino. And I've heard white people, us Anglo people, non-Latinos, have some critiques about it because they don't understand it culturally. Like there's some problems with the way it ends, right? Like people are like, oh, why did it have to X, Y, and Z? I'm like, because that's the way our stories end. Like that's why. Like you don't, it's not going to be the ending that you wanted because you're not of this culture. Like I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people who've wanted to do various things with Amano talking about who they would cast. And I'm like, why would you spend the money on X, Y, or Z when you're never going to see his face? And when I say that, they look at me like, what do you mean we're never going to see his face? And I'm like, look, if you don't understand that we're never going to see his face, we're not making this, because you don't, like, that is like a basic tenet of what's like, that's the whole point, the impetus of the story. So, what they don't get is something they will never admit to. And so they will always exercise their modicum of control to kind of hedge their bets, to try to make something niche a 4-quadrant success. And it's too brown to satisfy the 4-quadrant success, and then it's too 4-quadrant to actually authentically engage with the people it's supposedly made for. And I think that just being niche in some things and letting the kind of gravity of a intense but small initial base grow into something is a lot more sustainable than trying to create something big and broad and then weave in these kind of niche ideas. Like it's always going to be a defeating notion. And I think this, whatever success with my comic has enjoyed, thus far, has really been a testament to that. Because I was in Diamond for the first couple of issues. I got like a nice kind of initial push of kind of fan base. Then I'm out there hand selling these, and these are people who've been with me kind of through thick and thin. Like every fan I get is on board until I'm done. They waited patiently while the issues came out. They were waiting patiently while I'm getting my Kickstarter fulfilled. Like they're everyone's cool and on board. This isn't the kind of like blown up overnight success where I have like edgelords out there trying to like, it wasn't really that good. I'm like, yeah, like whatever. Yeah. So I think that kind of slow, steady, brick by brick wall that I built isn't appealing to people who are used to hitting the wall button and it just shows up for them one day. So
sure.
Yeah. Sorry, there's my long-winded critique of
it's
Hollywood.
it's a tough situation. But I mean, I love the pulp art style, and that's not the best way to describe it. But
I wanted them to look like artifacts from that time, from the 60s. Like I draw them, and they're on uncoated paper, they're on newsprint, so that you can like feel the paper and smell the ink coming off of there, because it's evaporative printing, not it's an absorption printing and not evaporative. So you can smell the ink, you can feel the paper, you can see the story, and you see that there's a human hand involved in it too. Like there's imperfections, and again, all of that seeks to kind of be a confession of artifice. This is made up. This is something that's been created. It's curated. It's not it's not me trying to like quote trying to reflect the real world, quote unquote real world. Like this is a story. So in that, it's like a magic trick. Like you go into a magic trick and someone goes, this is a magic trick, I'm going to fool you. And then when they fool you, it's even more impressive, right? Like, so I love stories that start with like, this is a story, once upon a time. Like, let's get into like, this is something that, is always true, but sometimes happened. And I think those are the best stories, right? And not worrying about the veracity or the fidelity to source material.
It's great. The story is good. The visuals are good. Right down to the distress plate, like you mentioned, to put over to give this kind of the visual effect to the page. It fits the style completely and entirely. So you're doing this campaign on Zoop. Tell me how Zoop to work with. A lot of different campaigns out there. How is Zoop?
I love it. It's great. They handle everything. Like having done a Kickstarter, and then just kind of like Kickstarter going like, lots of luck. Figure that all out, as supply chain issues become a problem, as like having to do my own, marketing and advertising and fulfillment and all. Like Zoop handles all of that. Like they're out there pushing the book, they're out there handling the fulfillment, they're out there handling production. I just get to concentrate on making the book, which is all I really wanted to do anyway. I just did all the other stuff because I had no choice, But like, taking that burden off of like logistics and supply sourcing and production and fulfillment and answering emails. Like I can't tell you with Kickstarter, like how much time I can lose just answering emails from Kickstarter questions in a day when I just need to be like, sitting down, making work happen. I'm like, all right, well, I got to answer this person and put this, give them this information, that, or just hunting down people. Like I've had a few boxes returned to now, and I'm like sending out like my 4th email to a couple people like, hey, I have your book. I want to give it to you. I just need an address. Nothing, zero. So they're handling all of that, and I can just be head down,
That's
making
wonderful.
the book happen, and but still be in control of it creatively. Because like to get that kind of freedom before, you had to like hook up with a publisher, and now they're going to have an opinion about content. And Zoop is not that. They're handling all the stuff I don't want to do. They're not trying to insert themselves in any areas. I don't want it. I don't want them in. They're just cool guys too. Like, like we text and email all the time. Like we're on top of like trying to get this campaign to be successful and stuff. So they're committed, they're enthusiastic, and they're willing to do the stuff I don't want to do.
Yeah, I've enjoyed working with them myself. I'm glad to hear your experience is good. And this book again looks great. I got to stress again, $15 digital, $20 for a printed copy for 80 pages is pretty damn good deal in today's day and age.
I like to think so.
The posters are great though. I mean,
thank you.
I love.
Yeah, we're gonna silk screen one of those. Like we're gonna do some fun stuff. Like I want to give people like value added. Like I don't want to just like have stuff for them to like. Oh, here's some stuff. Like we're gonna do pins, or we're gonna do like I don't want to just make garbage. Like I want like, oh, these are hand silk screen prints, or these are like these are 4-color limited edition silk screen prints and stuff like that. Like I want there to be a reason for someone to want to have it and not just have stuff. It's the same with like the back matter I put in my comic. We were talking about this earlier with Joe. Like give them a reason to want to read it. Like, with my stuff, it's like, here's everything from how I build my Photoshop files, which is things that people ask me about, to how I selected my color palette, to like some history. And it's not just here's the script pages because I needed to fill 8 extra pages. Like, no, it's like, if you want to check it out. Like, and there's plenty, like there's stuff in there for people who want to know the thinking behind it. And there's stuff in there for people who want to know the actual process behind it. So the same with like whatever my rewards, like I want it to be stuff that like, you're not going to be able to just get from me at a con, or you're not going to be able to just buy online. Like it's all stuff that like is exclusive to the Zoop campaign for the people who are willing to back the campaign as it's happening and kind of get on board on the ground floor and to mix my metaphors. I just want it to be cool stuff. Like I just want my book to be cool, and I want the stuff to be cool, and I don't want to just do things because things can be done. I want them to be cool.
Well, hopefully for people who are listening to this right now, if you're not watching on YouTube and you're just hearing the audio if you're you're not seeing some of the visuals, so definitely go to the campaign, the links in the description and so on. But you've seen some art if you are on YouTube, or you're on a podcast that has video. If you're not sold by what you're seeing here, I mean, just of the style, kind of the pulp aspect of the art, the Lucha Libre world. I mean, I know a lot of you listening are huge fans of that stuff. So, Gonzo, I thank you very much for spending time with us. Can we come back and after the campaign's over, talk to you again?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. There'll be another book after that, so I'll have to. No, I'm just kidding. But definitely, we can come back and just chat about whenever you want. Yeah. I love doing these. Yeah,
I'd love to. Talk. Yeah. Awesome. There's so much to talk about. I wish you all the success of this book, and it's, again, amazing. Please go check it out. It's a good campaign, easy entry price. How can you say no to that? But thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
All right.